Good evening, everyone. I'm just waiting for a few more people to join us. So please bear with us for one moment. If I could ask everyone to kindly keep their microphones muted and their videos switched off as we're recording tonight's event. Thank you. Okay, good evening, everyone. My name's Sarah McDougall. I'm the director of Benuri Gallery and Museum and curator of the current exhibition, Sheer Verve, the Women's International Art Club. Thank you very much for attending this online event, the second in our series of events from this programme. Just a reminder that we are recording this evening, so we're asking you to kindly keep your cameras turned off and your microphones muted to lessen any possible interference with the recording. The chat function will be open throughout the recording, so please do type in questions throughout the presentations, and at the end we'll fit in as many as we can. Sorry, I just admit a visitor. So I'm really delighted to introduce you this evening to our two experts on the Women's International Art Club. We have Dr. Mengting Yu and Dr. Yuna Richmond. So Dr. Mengting Yu is a postdoctoral researcher at the China Academy of Art, where she teaches courses on British art history, as well as modern and contemporary art. She received her PhD from Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, and her research interests include 20th century British art, modernism in a global and cross-cultural context, art exhibition societies, women artists, and women's art education. Her recent book, London's Women Artists, 1900 to 14, includes a chapter on the Women's International Art Club. Dr. Una Richmond completed her MA at the University of Sussex in 2016. Her dissertation analysed the 1974 Women's International Art Club exhibition entitled The Feminine Eye, and she completed her PhD also on the Women's International Art Club in 2023, and she has been an unofficial advisor and a huge help with the exhibition. Una is interested in questioning canonical art historical narratives and restoring the visibility of 20th century women artists through the study of all women group exhibitions. She's recently published an article on sculpture at the Women's International Art Club in the Sculpture Journal, and both Una and Mengting are also writing for the catalogue for our online catalogue accompanying the exhibition, which will be released in a few weeks. So Mengting will speak first, followed by Yuna, and then we'll have the Q&A. So over to you, Mengting. Thank you. You need to unmute.
Thank you for your introduction. I'll share my screen just for a moment. Can you all see it?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for this presentation. My name is Mengting, and then it's my honor to be here and to share my research on the history of Women's International Art Club, or WIAC for short. I would like to extend my thanks to Sarah, Yuna, and the Benuri Gallery for inviting me. My research has been focusing on British modern art history, London's avant-garde art scenes at the beginning of the 20th century, as well as modernism in a global cross-cultural context. Therefore, today's presentation will mainly focus on the early years of the club before the outbreak of the First World War. I will also briefly mention some other exhibition groups and societies from the same period of time to provide a context of the art scenes in London, where this club was based, and sheds light on its distinctive contributions within this broader art community. So in order to understand the WIAC, it's better to understand the context of it. So the establishment of this club needs to be understood in the context of the growing demand for women artists to pursue professional careers, but confronted with the challenging situation that only reduced and restricted opportunities available internationally due to the historic exclusion of women artists and dismissal of this traditional feminine art forms at the turn of the century. And in addition, the formation of this gender-specific art exhibition society that claimed to be the first to take the name International also coincided with the critical period when modern art discourses were predominantly associated with masculinity. And British modern artists sought inspirations from cultures outside of their own to win local art from parochialism. The club also provided a voice that has been omitted from the well-researched debate about modern art in Britain at the beginning of the 20th century, as it was prized by the French feminist newspaper La Fronde in 1901. The club and its exhibitions in its early years interested us in two ways, international and feminine, an excellent and promising endeavor. It's an excellent and promising endeavor for the future. Paris has been a thriving center for the arts since the mid-19th century, attracting students from all over Europe to come to visit. Young British artists, especially the independent women art students, frequently visited Paris to further their art education. However, access to national art schools in Paris was limited and restricted for foreign students in general and for women artists in particular. Private art academies founded by the leading practicing artists of the day, such as the Académie Colarossi, Académie Carmen, Académie Julian, Académie de la Palette, and Académie de la Cluse, which was established by French painter Auguste Joseph de la Cluse. This kind of private academy provided alternatives. This private academy also allowed women to access professional art education and even offering live drawing classes, which was not offered by the national art schools. In response to this kind of challenge of limited exhibition opportunities for women artists, Maud D. Hurst, an enterprising English art student from the De la Cluse studio, initiated the idea of establishing a society for the exhibition of works by women artists in Paris. Together with 4 other women students, Miss Spence Bate, Miss Alice Hay, Miss Heck, and Miss Gertrude Bednall, the society was started on June the 1st, 1898. And thank you, Yuna, for sharing with me this beautiful scan from the International Art Notes, where we can find the initial original proofs for their findings of this exhibition societies. And we can also find this information from an interview of the secretary of the club with the Daily News in 1904. The club's first exhibition was held in March 1900 at the Grafton Galleries in London under the name of Paris Club, International Society of Women Artists. To avoid the confusion with the pre-existing London-based Society of Women Artists, while maintaining its international spirit, the club's name was soon changed to Women's International Club in 1901 and remained unaltered until it was dissolved in 1978. Since then, this women-only art exhibition society facilitated communication among women artists from different nations and organized exhibitions of their artworks over decades. And the Society of Women Artists was actually exists today until present. After relocating to London, the WIAC took full advantage of the society's position as the global center of trade and an emerging, thriving artistic and cultural hub. with members such as Mary Ella Dignam, who spoke at the 1899 International Congress of Women to promote women's education and professional development in fine arts, exemplified the club's commitment to diversity, inclusivity, and feminine strength, as prized in critical reviews of the time. Their vision of creating a cooperative society for supporting one another and providing access to international contacts was universally welcomed and proved to be an invaluable platform of encouragement for young, curious, and experimental artists. For this, some of the most high-profile and accomplished international women artists, such as the American Fauvist painter Anna Estella Rice, which is on the left of the screen, as well as Polish painter Stanislawa Della-Kowalska, which is on the right, known through their association with the other exhibition groups in London, actually launched their career with the WIAC. Rice exhibited her Egyptian dancers with WIAC in March 1911, before her first solo exhibition in the same year, and also before her later experience in the widespread written magazines in June 1911. Stanislawa Della-Kowalska began exhibiting with the WIAC after 1905 in London, before she was actually elected to the London group in 1914, even though she was wife of painter Robert Bevan and closely associated with the Fitzroy Street group, as well as the male-only Camden Town group. Kowalska also served on the WIAC's Hanying Committee in 1913. Initially, the club was not seen very favorably, and the women-only policy was also questioned. Evelyn Howard, secretary of the club, told the Daily News in 1904, "In the beginning, the club was received with great scorn, numbers of people advising their friends not to join, as they said the club would soon go down. Then the press sneered at us because we were women. Still, in the spirit of all this opposition, we grow and grow until at present we are 150 strong. Not only did it not soon go down, but it was not dissolved until the 1970s. The longevity of the WIAC can be attributed to its effective management and a strong constitution from the outside. Its annual meeting minutes and annual reports review a club determined to self-examine, adaptive, and maintain control over general business, including member selections and financial performance. It also reflected on reviews and critiques relating to ongoing discussions in the press. All the while, it never lost sight of future planning. The club was run predominantly by an executive committee with an elected chair and treasurers. It holds 2 meetings a year where decisions on club's affairs, executive Hanying Committee member selections, and new members' admissions were decided by majority vote. Membership requirements were based on artistic merit and very competitive in terms of their low ratio of successfully elected new members to the total candidates put forward. The image on the left on the screen is from the interview published in Daily News.
I'm sorry, everyone, we seem to have lost sound for a moment, so we'll try and get Meng Ting back for you. Please bear with us, and many apologies. Apologies, everybody. This has never happened to us before, but unfortunately we have lost Meng Ting. She is joining us from Canada. There does seem to be some interference there. I'm going to ask Una if she would be kind enough to take over, and then we could either restart or pick up with Meng Ting's presentation when she's able to rejoin us. I do apologise to you all. Thank you for bearing with us.
Okay, can everybody see my slides, Sarah?
Yes, that's working perfectly. Thank you, Una.
Super. Okay. Whoops. So, thank you, Meng Ting, for a little bit of an introduction. I just want to start by thanking the Ben Uri Gallery, David, and especially Sarah, for transforming my PhD into the Shea Verve exhibition. I'm going to sort of pick up the history of the club from 1920 through to the 1970s. So it's going to be a little bit of a whistle-stop tour. But I'm going to be looking at where they exhibited, the international aspect of the club, how they were received in the press, and the kind of works that were shown. Although there was no typical style or genre of art, and one critic remarked on the astonishing variety of the club. Over 2,600 artists exhibited with the club over 8 decades. So I'm only going to be able to show you a tiny amount, but I hope it sort of gives you a flavour of the Women's International Art Club. So as Meng Ting mentioned, the first gallery the club exhibited in was the Grafton Galleries, and they continued showing there for the first 20 years. But like many art groups in London, they had no permanent premises. And by 1921, they'd moved on from the Grafton to the Whitechapel Gallery. And you can see the catalogue here. They exhibited alongside Dutch art. That was followed by the Goupil Gallery in Regent Street. And then the club kind of settled on a gallery called the Suffolk Street Galleries in Pall Mall. And they remained there until the early 1950s. The sort of artist who was exhibiting with the club in the 1920s, we have, well, the club was unique in that they invited individual international artists to exhibit with them in London, but they also invited women's art groups from abroad. And one of these was the Wiener Frauenkunst, which was dubbed at the time the Vienna's Female Secession, which was founded in 1926 as a sort of more avant-garde offshoot of the more traditional Austrian Association of Women Artists, who also exhibited at the club in London. And this is just a cover of one of their exhibition catalogues. And the cover from 1930, the cover translates as "How Does the Woman See?" Moving on to some British artists now. Life partners Nan Hudson and Ethel Sands, both founding members of the London group, were members of the club in the 1920s. The club was very inclusive of queer artists, and many lesbians and lesbian couples were welcomed as members. Also Marlowe Moss, who changed her name from Marjorie to Marlowe to be more gender neutral. She's going to be discussed further by Lucy Howarth at the Ben Uri talk next week. Moss rarely exhibited in group shows, but she seems to have been welcomed as a member of the club. Dame Ethel Walker exhibited with the club for almost 40 years and became their highly influential president from 1931 to 1945. This is one of 2 portraits she did of the young Barbara Hepworth, and both were shown at the club's annual exhibition, one in 1925 and another in 1926. And Hepworth herself exhibited at the club in the late 40s and early 50s. And a work by her is in the Shea Verve exhibition. daughter of Lucien Pizarro and granddaughter of Camille Pizarro, Orovida was fiercely independent and dropped her surname to become known simply as Orovida, forging her own path in life and becoming a significant member of the club for over 30 years. She rejected Impressionism and developed her own distinctive style, partly influenced by elements of Eastern, Indian and African art, which you can see in this piece. This work, a ceremonial dance, is in the exhibition, the Sheer Verve exhibition, and it was also shown 3 times at the Women's International, in 1927, 28, and then again in 1940. And it's quite an imposing piece. It's sort of on the right-hand side as you go in the exhibition, and it's incredible. Now, sculpture formed a small but important part of the club's annual exhibitions. They showed mostly 2-dimensional works, but this was true of most exhibiting societies, apart from obviously those dedicated to sculpture. Now, Elsa Frankel made this head of a young Chinese architecture student in 1928. And like Orovida, it shows her interest in Chinese subjects. But it wasn't actually shown at the club until 1937. And you can see this at the Sheer Verve exhibition as well. Another work in the exhibition is this image, which is a great example of some of the connections and friendships within the club. Clara Klinghoffer, the artist, was a good friend of Orovida and the Pizarro family. And she painted this portrait of Bengali artist Pratima Devi, whose sister, Sunayani Devi, was one of 6 Indian artists to exhibit with the club. And although this work wasn't shown at the club, Klinghoffer did exhibit a painting of Orovida's father, Lucien, in 1939, and her work, The Old Troubadour, which is in the Tate collection. It was shown at the annual exhibition of the club in 1928. Press coverage of the club was generally good by the 1920s, but it was sometimes tinged with condescension and sexism. The Architectural Review in 1926 seemed to think the club's work was good. But although the article by Augustus John for US Vogue was not actually about the club, it did actually sum up some of the general attitudes to women artists at the time. Augustus John talked about the weakness of women artists in his article and the encroachment of women in manly occupations. And his own sister, Gwen John, was a celebrated artist in Paris, and is actually there is a small work by her in the Sheer Verve exhibition. Now, moving on to the 1930s, as mentioned before, the club remained at the Suffolk Street galleries until the early 50s. This gallery was where the Royal Society of British Artists showed, also the London Group and the New English Art Club also showed there. And it later became known as the RBA galleries, but it was the same gallery. And I do like this sort of well-used copy. It's a desk copy with a lovely tea stain on it. Now, until 1938, the club exhibited the decorative arts, and that included jewellery, needlework, lacework, textiles, leatherwork, medals, ceramics, fans, and even furniture. Now, in this extract from the 1935 exhibition catalogue, you can see Dunsmore tiles, catalogue number 438. 2 students at the Central School of Art, Polly Brace and Kathleen Pillsbury, set up their own business, hand painting tiles, in the mid-20s, and were able to exhibit their work at the club and presumably generate some business. But from 1938 the Women's International only showed painting and sculpture. And it's not entirely known why. There's no records in the minutes of why they just suddenly stopped doing arts and crafts. But I kind of suspect it was to do with them competing with the other exhibiting societies like the London Group and the New English, who didn't exhibit arts and crafts at all. Another well-known name that showed with the club was Vanessa Bell, who showed a still life in 1938. It's unlikely to be this work, but you never know. But this shows a scene from one of the rooms at her home in Charleston in Sussex. And this work is actually in the Cherbourg exhibition. So press in the 1930s, again, not too bad. It was quite positive. The Observer seemed to like the Norwegian women painters. And the Nottingham Evening Post praised the club's high standard of excellence. Now, moving on to the 1940s. The Second World War saw many artists escape continental Europe, especially Jewish artists fleeing Hitler's regime. And this piece by Jewish emigre Elsa Frankel, she fled to Britain before the war, and she showed this work at, it was called Head of Girl, Shirley Solomon, at the club in 1948. And again, this is in the Cherbourg exhibition. Surrealism was represented at the club in the 1940s by two of the best-known British surrealists, Eileen Agar and Ethel Colquhoun. Agar was the only British woman exhibitor at the International Surrealist Exhibition held in London in 1936. And Colquhoun's work on the right, Autumn Equinox, was actually exhibited at the club in 1949. So the Women's International didn't only exhibit in London, they also exhibited regionally, supported by the Arts Council, which was founded in 1946. And that helped to fund the club's annual exhibition and these touring exhibitions, which took about 25 works from the annual exhibition. And they travelled to other parts of England, to Scotland and Northern Ireland. And it allowed regional audiences to see work by women artists. And generally, it was well received. However, there was one reported incident when complaints were received about a Stella Stein nude shown in Stourbridge in 1953. The local art society objected to the painting because they said it was unsuitable for children. And the press reported that the work was turned to face the wall for the entire duration of the exhibition. So it wasn't without controversy. And throughout the club's history, they periodically included a special section where they sourced works of historic women artists from galleries and private collectors. And this was a way for the club to legitimise their work by comparing themselves to women artists of the past. So in the 1948 exhibition, for example, it included works by Rosa Bonheur, Mary Cassatt, Mary Moser, Angelica Kaufman and Gwen John. And I will be talking more about the historic section in a talk later in this series of talks. And now we move into the 1950s. The club occasionally showed at the New Burlington Galleries, which again, they shared with the New English and the London Group, so they were in very good company. And this is a photograph of the club's annual exhibition at the New Burlington, where German sculptor Marge Moll showed 4 works, and this is just one of them. Moll was a member of the Women's International, but she helped arrange an invitation to artists from the Association of German and Austrian Female Artists. That was founded in 1926 by Ida Demel, a Jewish feminist, writer, and a supporter of the arts. And it's still in operation today. More examples of work in the 1950s. This is Scottish artist Wilhelmina Barnes Graham. She showed with the club in the 50s and again in the 60s. And this actual work was shown in 1952 at the club and shows her style of abstraction, which shares similarities with her drawings and paintings of glaciers, which she did in the early 50s, inspired by a holiday in Switzerland. The press was rather polarized in the 50s. This Bernard Denvier's Women Can't Paint review of the annual show in 1954, which incidentally received excellent reviews in art publications and broadsheet newspapers, but it included reference to women leaving the kitchen sink for the studio, and he also repeated gender stereotypes such as men paint because art form is their form of creation, but women paint just for the fun of it. But this could be seen against a kind of backdrop of a post-war regeneration and regression in a way to traditional gender roles and the promotion of women within the home, looking after the family, as seen in this lovely Women's Own advert. But, I mean, this is contrasted with other reviews of the club in the same decade, saying the exact opposite. The Hartlepool Echo said, any idea that the Women's International Art Club is concerned mainly with flower studies or baby's first smile is shattered in the RBA galleries. And again, the Times said there was notable competence, which is a little condescending, but generally there was favourable coverage. Also in the 1950s, the club appeared in full-page spreads in the society pages of Tatler magazine, and this was mainly due to the prestige of royal patronage by Princess Marina, the Duchess of Kent, who was the club's patron from 1949 to 1968. And this shows the private view of the Jubilee exhibition in 1950. Moving on to the 1960s. And now the club were back in the Whitechapel Gallery. This is a photograph of the Whitechapel Gallery, the annual exhibition. And I think the man on the far right, I could be wrong, but I think that is the director of the gallery, Brian Robertson, holding an exhibition catalogue. There's also on the left, on the wall, a Mary Fedden still life just above the head of the woman seated. And then possibly at the back of the room, there could be a Sonia Delaunay, but I'm not entirely sure. I think I might have to check that. It's very difficult to tell. But I find this image absolutely fascinating. There's a lot going on, and I love the lady lying down with her sunglasses on, having a little rest. So amazing. This is another of the very, very few installation shots I have of the club's exhibitions. But this, it's Carolyn Stafford in front of her painting, abstract painting landscape, with her son Jonathan, who has a club catalogue in his hand. And I think it shows that even when it became easier to exhibit in the 1960s, there was still a role for the club in the sort of shared experiences, the camaraderie that comes from belonging to a women-only group. There was collaboration and networking on a professional and personal basis, and it was made easier, and it provided a kind of safe, empathetic space in which they could operate. Now, there don't seem to be any photographs of any committee meetings or get-togethers of the Women's International, but I did find this photograph of the Society of Women Artists. And this is their selection committee from 1968. And again, a fabulous photograph. And I think the Women's International would have been much the same. They were kind of similar. And group exhibiting committees in mixed groups were very male-dominated places. So even into the latter half of the 20th century. So having control over how their society or their club was run and the selections they made was important. Now, occasionally, the club also had exchange exhibitions with women's groups abroad. Now, this is a catalogue cover from an exhibition held in Greece. The Women's International travelled to Greece and exhibited there. And in the same year, this is 1965, the club showed in Paris and in Florence. So they had a bumper year abroad. Abstraction was a major influence on the artists of the club in the 60s. A pioneer of British abstraction from the 50s, Sandra Blow, was a member of the club throughout the 60s, showing many of her abstract works there. And this small but very impactful work of hers is in the Chez Veuve exhibition, although it wasn't exhibited at the club, I don't think. And another work in Chez Veuve is this work by Helen Frankenthaler. Now, two major exhibitions of American abstraction and abstract expressionism were held at the Tate in the late 1950s, and that had a huge influence on all artists in Britain. The club's response was to invite female American abstract expressionists to show with them at the 1960 annual exhibition. The invitees included Frankenthaler, Lee Krasner, and Joan Mitchell, amongst others. But 6 years later, Frankenthaler was again invited to show with the club at the Whitechapel, but she refused. She said that she didn't exhibit with societies. And I'm not entirely sure if she realised that 3 of her works had actually been shown 6 years earlier. But they'd been loaned to the club by the United States Information Service, so it's possible that she actually didn't know that they'd been shown. And abstraction, again, as I say, was a dominant style within the club in the 60s, which the critics very much remarked on. And this is my favourite review of the club. I'll read it out. The Women's International Art Club was founded in 1900. If the matriarchs were to walk into the RBA galleries today, they would yell for the smelling salts. Emancipation's run riot. There's not a nice, quiet, ladylike landscape in sight. Never a bow wow, never a dicky bird. Abstracts, abstracts everywhere. No sensitive bachelor should visit this exhibition till his leap year terrors are over. The soul of woman laid bare on these walls would unhinge him. And I think that just kind of seems to sum up the sheer verve of the Women's International Art Club at the time. 2 years later, that review, Eric Newton in The Guardian reviewed their 1962 exhibition. And on the whole, it was an excellent review. And I kind of based my PhD on that. His title refers directly to Simone de Beauvoir's book, The Second Sex, which had been translated into English in 1953. So the audience would have, of readers would have understood the reference, I think. But there were sort of sexist tropes remaining, and he refers to the kitchen stove, the nursery, and again, domesticity is mentioned, especially in relation to sculptors. So there were still undertones of sexism there. Into the 1970s, Halima Nalish, a club member and the owner of the Drehan Galleries, allowed the club to use her gallery free of charge. And they showed there in 1968, 72, and again in 74. Now, it had a reputation, the gallery that is, of hosting young avant-garde émigré artists, but it was a small gallery. The average number of exhibits in previous decades had been about 300, going up to about 500 in some of the larger galleries. But by the 60s and 70s, this kind of dropped to an average of about 100, sometimes even fewer. And in 1974, the Feminine Eye exhibition held at the Drehan Galleries, and this was the first time they'd given their exhibition a title. It was also the only illustrated catalogue that the club produced, and it's actually a really useful record of the sort of work that the club was showing in the mid-1970s, because you can't always, find some of the works that were being shown. And although it was in black and white, still really useful. And there was, only 62 pieces or works were exhibited at this exhibition. And we've got 3 examples of that 1974 exhibition. A self-portrait by Ottilie Talansky called Jonathan and I, and an abstract by Ithell Colquhoun. And both of these artists have works in the Sheer Wurf, not these works, but other works in the Sheer Wurf exhibition. Plus the sculpture in the bottom left by Betty Jewson, who was featured in the BBC TV programme Fake or Fortune about 2 years ago as a possible Henry Moore sculpture. And needless to say, she was the fake, not the fortune. In the 70s, reviews were still largely positive, but by this time, there was nothing in the mainstream press, and the coverage only appears to have been in Arts Review, an art publication, and the local press. And as you can see from the second one, there was a kind of a feeling within the club, but also in the press, that they should really admit men. There had been male guest selection committee members, but not artist members. And finally, a painter called Richard Jones became the first, and as far as I know, the only male artist to be a member of the club, exhibiting with them in 1976. In 1970, the club lost its Arts Council funding. Subscription fees and fundraising couldn't really sustain the club, and they started looking for cheaper alternatives. And one of those was libraries, because they struggled to find funds to fund the larger galleries. And this is Joan Hodes at Hornsey Library in 1970. And she trained at the Slade, also in Paris, and later with Oskar Kokoschka. She was a committee member, and I was lucky enough to interview her about her life and her experiences with the club before she sadly passed away last year at the age of 96. Sadly, the club disbanded in 1978 after a series of setbacks. The club's royal patron, the Duchess of Kent, died in 1968, and she wasn't replaced by any other member of the royal family. As I mentioned previously, the Arts Council funding was reduced in 1969, and then they lost it altogether in 1970. But it was also felt that women had achieved equality. Personally, I don't think they had, but that's what it felt at the time, and membership numbers were dwindling, so they just couldn't afford to carry on, and they disbanded in 1978. But to finish on a positive note, A European study identified that women's art groups were the most consistent element in the exhibiting history of Western women's art. Despite the occasional negative press, the club offered a way for women artists to assert their identity, and they were able to take advantage of the opportunities that group shows afforded. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Una, for that fantastic presentation. And thank you also for stepping into the breach there. I know we have Meng-Ting back with us now, and we can ask you if you would like Meng-Ting to restart your presentation and pick up perhaps where you left off. I know we'd had that fabulous introduction to those early years, and then you were just getting into your stride when technology let us down. But I leave it up to you whether you would like to restart at that point or whether you want to go back a bit earlier.
Okay, sure. Let me.
Okay, we shall.
Yeah.
Are you having any trouble, Meng-Ting?
Yep. Let me try to open it. I think I'll open it and then I'll try to share it. Let's see. Okay. I'm so sorry. My computer just suddenly shut down and then I have to reconnect everything. I'm so sorry that I was not there. I was here. Okay, I think I'll just redo this page and then I'll continue to do the rest of the slides. I'm so sorry again. Okay. Okay, so initially the club was not seen very favorably, and then the woman-only policy was also where it was questioned. And Evelyn Howard, secretary of the club, told the Daily News in 1904 that in the beginning, the club was received with great scorn, numbers of people advising their friends not to join, as they said the club would soon go down. And then the press sneered at us because we're women. And still in the spirit of all this opposition, and we grow and grow until we're 150 strong. And it was, as we know, not only did not soon go down, but it was not dissolved until the 1970s. And the longevity of the WIAC can be attributed to its effective management and a strong constitution from the outside. Its annual meeting minutes and annual reports review a club. It's determined to self-examine, adaptive, and maintain control over general business, and including member selections and financial performance. It also reflected on reviews and critiques relating to ongoing discussion in the press. Although while it never lost sight of future planning. And the club was run predominantly by an executive committee with an elective chair and chatters. It holds 2 meetings a year where decisions of club's affair, executive and kind committee selections, and new member admissions were also decided by a majority vote. Membership requirements were based on artistic merit and very competitive in terms of very competitive in terms of the low ratio of successfully elected new members to the total candidates put forward. And the image on the left was from the Daily News, the interview of the Daily News. And then the image on the right was scanned from the club's annual report in 1913 with the voting paper section at the bottom, which is circled in red. Unlike those societies that sought royal patronage in pre-war years, the club relayed largely on self-funding through member subscriptions and proceeds from sale of exhibits, supplemented by a small amount earned from entrance fee and annual exhibition peripherals, such as admission money, sales of catalogs, advertisements, and sales of exhibition. The club's income statement in 1912 to 1914, for example, demonstrated well-balanced financial performance, with a satisfying increase in sales from previous years. And this sound financial performance in the previous years allowed the club to be economically and to some extent artistically independent. There was only one special occasion when the club asked for royal patronage, royal support in its early years, which was in the 1914 to 1915, when there was a special charity exhibition dedicated to Belgian lace workers. And the club also announced that they will donated all the gates money to the war fund, which one was Queen's Work for Women's Fund, and then the other one is Belgium's Relief Fund. The club consistently held its annual exhibitions since 1900, with only 2 interruptions during the First World War. One is in 1916 and the other one is in 1918. And during 1900 to 1920, their exhibition usually took place at the renowned Grafton Galleries. And this gallery played a very central role in the emergence of modern painting in Britain. It hosted significant exhibitions, such as the first major Impressionist exhibitions in Britain in 1905, as well as Roger Fry's 2 milestone exhibitions of post-Impressionist works, one in 1910 and the other one is in 1912. Recognized for this vital role of an international network of art communication, the Grafton Galleries allied perfectly with one of the fundamental principles embraced by the WIAC. Considering the silence surrounding club in current scholarship, a close examination of newspapers and articles reveals that its annual exhibition received increasingly widespread coverage and stimulated intense discussion in various international, national, regional, quality, and entertainment publications of the day, especially in the year leading up to the war. The club's profile among critics remained positive, although its international element continued to be a topic of discussion. The majority of the members were British, and many had received their trainings in Paris, leading some of the critics to perceive the club as less international and more French than it might wish to be. Despite such comments, it is necessary to emphasize that the club's remarkable diverse membership, as well as policy to encourage communication and connection among women artists worldwide, I think that is this kind of international aspect of the club's exhibition activities that is of the greatest interest and importance. The exhibition organized by the club in the period in question featured primarily oil paintings, along with prints, sculptures, watercolors, and crafts items. This slide shows all the cover designs used by the club for their exhibition catalogs between 1900 to 1914, which changed over time, as we can see. The redesign of the cover in 1905, reflecting modernist simplicity, indicated the club's aspirations to be at the forefront of modern artistic activity. Within their regular annual exhibitions previously mentioned, the club had a policy of arranging separate foreign sections as well, showcasing a selection of invited works from countries abroad. Notable instances included works from France, Holland in 1904, a Hungarian craft section in 1913, which was selected by the chairman of Hungarian Applied Arts Society, and a Swedish section in 1914. It was collaborated with the Association of Swedish Women Artists. And this also holds particular significance due to the exclusion of women artists from Sweden's artistic circle, especially after the avant-garde group called the Young Ones banned the women members in 1907. And unfortunately, some plans such as the foreign section featuring on works from Vienna and Munich in 1915 fell through due to the outbreak of the war. Another highlight of the foreign section was the inclusion of crafts and applied art, such as the exhibition in 1914, showcased the beadwork and embroideries by North American Indian women. This has sparked a discussion of elevating the importance of these traditionally feminine artistic practices beyond the realm of crafts and challenge the long-standing aesthetic hierarchy that had privileged certain forms of art based on gender association. In addition to promoting foreign contemporary women artists, the club also pursued an active interest in exhibiting distinguished works from historical collections, bringing across regional culture and generational conversation of women's artworks to a modern London's audience. The exhibition featured artworks by iconic women artists such as English portrait painter Mary Beale, Italian Renaissance portrait painter Sophonisba Anguissola, Swiss neoclassical painter Angelica Kaufmann, and French artist Rosa Bonheur, and Dutch portrait painter Aleida Wolfson. To some extent, the club's international art selection also reflected some of the growing interest in Oriental art during these pre-war years. Notably speaking, in 1911, the exhibition in 1911 featured a remarkable piece by Japanese woman artist Shanki Kusai Hokume, entitled Tokiwa Sheltering Her Children in the Snow. Hokume worked in the early 19th century and was a pupil of the famous Japanese ukiyo-e master, Kanzushika Hokusai. Despite the lack of information for the artist, the story of the Lady Tokiwa was printed in detail in the catalog, which showed the club's efforts to eliminate the cultural context barrier in introducing international women artists and their artworks. This exhibition took place shortly after the Great Japan-British exhibition in 1910 at White City, and also the exhibition of Chinese and Japanese painting from the 4th to 19th century in 1910 to 1911, which is curated by the Orientalist Lawrence Bion at the British Museum. I think the club's inclusion of Hokume's piece may have been an acknowledgement of and a response to the positive public reaction to these early exhibitions, as well as modernist interest towards arts in Far East in general. This international communication fostered by the club did not flow in one direction only. The club also set up branches abroad and regularly sent out members' works overseas to significant exhibitions. For example, their committee was invited to arrange the British section of fine arts at the second Women's International Exhibition of Fine Arts in Turin in 1913. And this remarkable exhibition featured more than 600 women artists' works from 9 countries, including Italy, which offered a comprehensive overview of women's art in Europe. And the image on the left is the poster designed for this exhibition in Italy. And then the floor plan at the bottom on right of the exhibition shows where the British section was located, which was in the circled in red. And also we should highlight that the British section was not confined to WIAC's members alone. And there are a total about 60 pictures and crafts was sent in response to this invitation. And here is an image taken from the British section that showcases drawings, sculptures, and applied art. Here are more images of the exhibited works in Turin contributed by British women artists invited by the club. And many of them, as I can see, many of them are member of the club and some were not. And there's one member, Anna Ari, as member of the New English Art Club. All these images were found from La Donna, an Italian fashion magazine, the public special issue dedicated to the exhibition in Turin. And then it was hard to find many pictures about WIAC's exhibiting images, but this is one of them that we can see what art was being exhibited. The inauguration of this exhibition in Italy was marked by a powerful speech by the mayor of Turin, which also resonated deeply with the essence of this club. Maybe we can use his word to describe the significance and impact of this long-forgotten club's efforts in promoting women artists and confronting prevailing exclusion with a visionary and international approach to long-term development in the pre-war years. An exhibition of women's art is more than an exhibition, but a battle of truth against the prejudice. And also, I would like to say, today's presentation is not intended to be any comprehensive history of the club in the pre-war years. And indeed, if anything, it has raised more questions than it has answered. We have a discussion with Yuna that we had a lot of the information that we still need to find, and a lot of the artists and the artists of the images that we need to confirm. So I think with the opening of this exhibition, Yuna's research, this club will attract a greater scholarly attention and inspire further academic studies, which in turn will contribute to the recognition of this recognition and understanding of these long forgotten groups. And then thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Meng Ting, and for keeping your cool and so bravely rejoining us after that little technological hitch, which of course we all understand how these things happen at the most inconvenient times. If you would both like to, Una, if you would like to reveal yourself again, and it would be lovely if you would both join me. I'm sure we're going to get some questions coming through in the chat. I have had a couple of questions sent to me previously, which I could kick us off with. And we can continue that discussion that you've both begun with your presentations and highlighted so many interesting issues about the club. So Meng Ting, one for you really. How would you say that the WIAC's relationship and connection with other exhibition groups in London, did they share memberships and that kind of thing?
Oh yeah, of course. As we can see that WIAC, their membership was actually quite separated from other exhibition groups supported by the Royal Academy or Royal Patronage. And then, we also can tell that there are not many, compare with other exhibition groups, and then the Women's International Art Group has more members and bodies from overseas. And also there are many women actually started their career with the WIAC and then be known to other exhibition groups and join other exhibition groups. Yeah, and in terms of the membership, and then we can see a lot of French artists, like French Paris-based artists that came to London and then become members through the Women's International Art Club. Yeah.
And you mentioned that French training that lots of them had sort of gave a slight misconception early on about the women taking part. Did you want to add anything more to that? Or Una, would you like to come in and comment on what Meng Ting has said? I don't think you're
Yes, sorry. Sorry, could you ask that again?
Yes, so I just wondered if you wanted to comment on Ming Ting's last point about the exhibiting societies that were sort of they had in common, you know, there were connections between these groups in London.
Oh my goodness, yes.
And
There
shared
was,
memberships, that sort of thing.
yeah, there was lots of connections between the different societies. Yeah, they all exhibited the women less so in, say, the New English and the London group, and the membership, especially in the New English and the London group, was only a quarter of the membership throughout practically the whole of the 20th century. The membership was only a quarter women. So another reason for setting up their own club. Although, yeah, they exhibited there, but I think there was a barrier there with membership. And I see I was a bit distracted because there was a question about why didn't the Women's International just join the Society of Women Artists? And the reason was they'd been going for a long time. They accepted amateur artists in the Society of Women Artists, and the Women's International were professional artists only. Also, the Society of Women Artists had a sort of hierarchical system of associate memberships and full memberships. And I think the Women's International wanted to be a little bit more egalitarian and just have a sort of flat membership. So there were big differences in the way they operated. And I think the Women's International just wanted to go another way. They wanted to be a bit more avant-garde, whereas the Society of Women Artists weren't quite so avant-garde. And also the Women's International invited international artists and women's art groups. And that was another big difference between the two.
And Ming Ting, I think you mentioned how important it was that they were quite critical. They didn't let everybody in. It was quite a process to be considered. And then, you know, I think you said relatively few were let in, even though many asked to be put forward for membership.
Right, it was true. It was actually for 1912, if I can remember correctly. They have 40 applicants, and then they only accept 7 of them, and then they have a body of over 100 members total, like every year, and there are people resigned, about like 7 to 8 every year they were resigned, and then in order to fill that membership, and then they were to elect other members. So they recommend their other artists, but they, in terms of this ratio, which was 7 to 8 slash 50 or something like that, that's about the ratio that they select their members. Yeah, that was about that, which was, I think, was quite competitive. And then also compared with the other exhibition groups there, they, like what Yuna said, there are no hierarchical systems. So it's very kind of free, and then voting in terms of everything about the club was decided by the voting. So, which was very different from the Society of Women Artists, which was more hierarchical. And then also they were supported by the royal patronage, and then they were not as free, as artistic independent as the Women's International Art Club. Yeah.
Although, of course, we note there was a royal patron later on for the Women's International Art Club as well. I'll stop there because there's a couple of other questions here. So Geraldine asks, well, she thanks you both, and she says, was the WIAC ever featured in the Penrose Annual? Anyone can answer this interesting question?
I don't know is the answer to that. I don't know.
Okay, I think, Geraldine, that's one to be looked into.
Definitely to be looked at.
Yes. Okay, and then we have a thanks from Tom here, and he asks Una, on one slide you cited a critic in the Arts Review in 1970 celebrating that a few women had shown political topics. this seemed to him an unusual step. Can you comment on the relative absence of political subjects and why this began to change?
Yes, up until that point, they were quite traditional in that they didn't protest. They weren't a feminist group. They were avant-garde artists, but they didn't see themselves as feminists. And this was the case for most. I interviewed about 8 artists for the PhD who are still alive today, who exhibited with the club, and none of them identified as feminist as such. So I think there wasn't such sort of radical aspect of the club until much later on, when, of course, the late 60s and the 70s, feminist art then started to happen.
And I think in the exhibition we have 1 or 2 works where politics is kind of indirectly approached. For example, in Paula Rego's Hungry Dogs, which is a criticism of of Franco's regime, but of course I'm sure there's a direct connection to her own upbringing, in Portugal, and reference to Salazar's regime as well. And then things like The Frink, where she is indirectly political, sort of commenting on the brutality of warfare through the image that she chooses. We're going to close in just a second because we have run rather over time, but I just wanted to put this last question to Meng Ting, which had come in. What did international networks between women artists and women organisations mean for women artists then and for British art history? So that's quite a big question, Meng Ting, but if you could try and sum that up.
Okay.
Way.
Yeah, it is something that came up, and then when I did my research, I realized there was interesting clusters and groups among women students while they were in the school. And then the clusters continued after their graduation and developed as their career develops. And then I realized that there was this kind of a mutual support system among women during this kind of special period of time when they were not given many opportunities, that they are kind of a mutual support system, support them as a group, as a cluster to develop. And then that's what I found the WIAC's strategies. They had their own group as well. And then they also connected with other exhibition groups overseas, and to have this kind of international support among women. And it's like women supports women worldwide in order to develop a woman's professionalism as a thing that's not local, regional thing, but it's like it's a global thing, it's a worldwide thing. And then it's something quite stunning and useful at that period of time, during that period of time. So and then also I think it's kind of opened up this kind of a new research area where there's the network between women artists themselves and art networks between the organizations in this way to approach British history of art. Yeah.
Thank you, Meng Ting. And we've got some lovely thanks coming in here from lots of people, John Duncan and Craig and Tom Stanmers, and among others. So this evening's event has been recorded, as I mentioned at the beginning, so we will be able to send it out to all of you so you can fully enjoy both the presentations, and we may even be able to rearrange it and put it in order. But I will speak to my more technical colleagues about that. So I'd like to really thank you both for this evening's presentations. Thank you so much, Meng Ting, for joining and rejoining us. And thank you, Una, as ever. It's a great pleasure to have you both. And we look forward to reading your contributions in the catalogue. Thank you, everybody. And don't forget to join us next week, of course, for Lucy Howarth's talk on the sculptor Marlowe Moss, which will be another fascinating evening. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Una.
Thank you.
Thank you.